Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that Mother's Day is around the corner, and if you haven't gotten anything yet, you don't have to panic. Instead of going to Amazon for the last minute or grabbing some flowers, you can get something for your wife that feeds her soul. A ticket to Share the Arrows with Blaze Media's own Allie Beth Stuckey in Allen, Texas on October 11th. It's not just an event, it's a powerful, faith filled experience where women come together to encourage each other, get equipped, and remind themselves that their purpose as wives, mothers, and daughters is incredibly important to God. You don't have to wait for shipping, you don't have to wrap anything. You can get something meaningful so that your wife knows that you value her and strengthening her walk with Christ. Tickets are going fast, so go to sharethearrows.com to grab your ticket now. That's sharethearrows.com. All right, guys, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about foreign policy. A lot of people look at the current Trump administration, some of the things that are happening, and they don't like it. A lot of people who invested heavily in the liberal global order, thinking that the United States needs to be involved in these large global organizations and these constant global wars, they're very angry at the current stance of, I think, what you could call MAGA or the new right, that they sometimes accuse it of being isolationist and saying, "Oh, well, you're discarding this legacy of American diplomacy and leadership around the world and all these things. We need to return to the American tradition." But what did the founding fathers actually say about foreign policy? What did they really believe about whether or not we should get involved in foreign wars? I want to take a look today at George Washington's farewell address. This used to be something that you read in school. It's something that every school child had to read and understand, but fewer and fewer people do this anymore. And while I love to talk about many different philosophers, often in traditions that are perhaps outside of the United States, I do that because sometimes I assume people know what our founders thought about these issues. But more and more, the stories we tell ourselves, even as conservatives, are very different from the words of the founders. So I thought we would do a little bit of civics class 101. Mr. MacIntyre is going to put on his teaching hat again today. We're going to break down some American civics. We're going to go through George Washington's farewell address, or at least several pages of it, and get some of those original opinions. What did our first president think about involving ourselves in foreign affairs and favoring foreign nations? We're going to get to all that, but before we do, let's hear from today's sponsor. This episode of the Auron MacIntyre Show is proudly sponsored by Consumers Research. You've heard about Larry Fink and BlackRock and ESG and all the ways that they're ruining your life, making your groceries more expensive and making your video games more woke. Well, Consumers Research has spent the last 5 years making Larry's life hell, and they're just getting started. Their work and its consequences have been profiled by the Washington Post, New York Times, and most recently, Fox News business reporter Charlie Gasparino wrote a whole chapter in his book, Go Woke, Go Broke, on how effective they've been at dismantling BlackRock's ESG patronage scheme. He's making Larry Fink lose the last bit of hair on his balding head, and you should follow Will's work on X so you can laugh along with him. His handle is at Will Hild, at Will, WILLHILD, on X. All right, guys, so let's take a look at George Washington's farewell address. Now, this is not that long of a document. I encourage you to read the whole thing if you haven't. We don't have time to read the whole thing top to bottom on the stream today, but I pulled several pages that where he gets into the way we should look at foreign policy. Again, so many people look at the Trump administration and their approach, or they look at the new right and their desire to focus on America and put America first, and they say that there's something wrong with this, there's something nefarious with this, that this somehow betrays American tradition. None of that is true. In fact, it's really the opposite when you look at what George Washington says here. Now, I want to make it clear, sometimes when we talk about the founding fathers, we're creating a unified opinion where none exists. The founders were different people, and they had different opinions, and the understanding of someone like famously Jefferson and Hamilton were very different. And so George Washington's foreign policy doesn't necessarily define every founding father and everything that they believed. But obviously, Washington's position as our first great general, our first great president, well, first great general, we can get into details about that. Point being, someone who's a great military leader, a great president, someone who is obviously arguably the founding father, his belief on this matters, right? This is somebody who's got pretty big standing in the United States. So I think looking at him gives us a pretty reasonable understanding of what the American tradition was intended to be. Again, it's not one voice. There are multiples, and we should look at multiple founding fathers. But I think this one is pretty significant. And again, since this is a critical document in, I think, our nation's history, that a lot of people just don't read anymore, I think it's just generally good to go over it and get the idea here, because he warns us against being too hostile to other nations, but also warns us against being too favorable to other nations. He does not like us having a arch enemy or a best ally. And since we throw around the words best ally a lot, there's a lot of countries like the UK, we have a special relationship, or Israel, our greatest ally. We hear terms like that all the time. And that's just not what George Washington believed that we should be doing. He said specifically that that is not a good way to conduct ourselves on the world stage. So if we decide to withdraw from those positions, if we decide to return to a more balanced foreign policy, we are actually just returning to the understanding that someone like George Washington had about foreign policy. And as stories start to come out about whether or not, some relations have broken down between the Trump administration and Netanyahu, I think it's wise to just consider this in the context, because again, this is what arguably our most important founding father told the nation. This is the thoughts he wanted to share before he stepped out of a presidency he did not have to step out of. He could have easily probably just been king, but he didn't. He did the Cincinnatus thing, and when he left, he said some pretty profound stuff that I think we should be looking at today. All right, so let's take a look at what he said here. Again, it's like a 31 pages, not even, it's barely 31 pages, very short, very easy to read. I encourage you to read the whole thing yourself if you have not. But here's Washington. He says, observe good faith and justice towards all nations, cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct. And can it be that good policy does not equally enjoin it? So right off the bat, we should be looking for good faith and justice towards all nations. It's what morality and religion dictate. And if that's what morality and religion dictate, then that's what policy should dictate. So right away, we see that Washington thinks that these are harmonious, right? That all of these work together. He says it will be worthy of a free, enlightened, and at no distant period a great nation to give to mankind the magnanimous and too novel example of a people always guided by an exalted justice and benevolence. He says, I am predicting that this will be a great nation, and we should give an example to the world of a great people who are guided by justice and benevolence. Who can doubt that in the course of time and things, the fruit of such a plan would richly repay any temporary advantage that might be lost by a steady adherence to it? We shouldn't be taking the short view. We shouldn't look for short-term advantage. We should be understanding that a solid policy, that a wise policy, that a prudent policy is one that will continue into the future. Can it be that Providence has not connected the permanent felicity of a nation with its virtue? The experiment, at least, is recommended by every sentiment which ennobles human nature. Alas, it is rendered impossible by its vices. So once again, the founders are always pointing to virtue. Virtue is incredibly important, right? That's the key. That's what allows the American form of governance to operate. To the degree that it does not operate, it is a lack of virtue that has afflicted it. And so if you have a virtuous population, they should be able to conduct their foreign policy in this way. In the execution of such a plan, nothing is more essential than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachment for others should be excluded, and that in place of them, just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. So here he warns against being too hostile or too favorable, right? We do not want to deeply invest our identity in hostility towards other nations or in loyalty to other nations. We should be neither excessively favorable nor excessively hateful. The nation which indulges towards another and a habitual hatred or a habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and interest. So if you are too angry or you are too loyal to another country, you become its slave. If you are focusing all of your energy and hatred towards a country, you are its slave. And if you are focusing all your support or favor towards a country, you are its slave. That is something that I think a lot of people on both sides of the foreign policy debate, especially around places like Ukraine and Israel, should probably think about. Not not overly hostile, not obsessed with being hostile to it, but also not loyal to it, not making yourself overly favorable to it. Either way, that leads you towards slavery. Let's see. Where did I leave off there? Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold on slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable when accidental or trifling occasions of dispute occur. So don't be overly hostile. It makes you quick on the trigger, right? If you're too hot towards another state, if you're too angry, you're going to constantly be looking for offense. You're going to take offense at every turn, and you are going to make mistakes. Hence, frequent collisions, obstinate, envenomed, and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government contrary to the best calculations of policy. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity and adopts through passion what reason would reject. At other times, it makes the animosity of the nation subservient to projects of hostility instigated by pride, ambition, and other sinister, pernicious motives. The peace, often, sometimes perhaps the liberty of nations, has been the victim. So if you are too passionately against a nation, if you're too angry, if you're too hostile to a foreign nation without cause, this can create a situation where the government will follow the passions of the people and go to war in a case where it should not, or the government has the ability to whip up the people to go to war if they have that special interest in a case where they otherwise would not, where rational interests for the United States would not take this position. So again, here, being hostile has its own problems. So likewise, a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for a favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of imaginary common interests in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing in one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter without adequate inducement or justification. So he's already said we have to be careful about being too angry. We have to worry about being too hostile towards another nation. However, we also need to be very careful about being too sympathetic, about being too favorable. Because if you become too favorable towards another country, especially when they might not reciprocate the same way, but even if they do, you still need to be careful, because ultimately it will facilitate the illusion that you have common interests. If you favor another nation, no matter what, on a consistent basis, you will build up this idea that you have the same interests when you don't. And that will make you easier to manipulate. It will cause you to possibly take on their interests when you don't have them. And this will put you in quarrelsome wars you should not be involved in, with no real justification for it. It leads also to concessions to the favorite nation of privileges denied to others, which is apt doubly to injure the nation making the concessions, but unnecessarily parting with what ought to have been retained, and by exciting jealousy, ill will, and a disposition to retaliate in the parties from whom equal privileges have been withheld. So if you make another nation your favored nation, if you make a nation one that you are supporting no matter what, then ultimately you will make these concessions. And not only will those concessions hurt your country because you are making concessions you should not make normally, but it will also encourage you to basically anger every other nation who is not reading or receiving that status, right? If you are not receiving the status of the favored nation and everyone else is noticing the special treatment that the other nation gets, it will create hostility from those other nations. And your point as being American politician is not to favor other nations or create those relationships. It's to serve the interests of the American people. So if you're angering all these other nations because they're not getting the benefits that the favored nation is, then you are not doing America a service. And you could be hurting America by giving concessions to a nation that is not ultimately loyal to you. And so he worries that this is something that just anyone will fall into if they're constantly favoring a foreign power. And it gives to ambitious, corrupted, or deluded citizens who devoted themselves to the favorite nation facility to betray or sacrifice the interests of their own country without odium, sometimes even with popularity, gilding with appearance of a virtuous sense of obligation, a commendable deference for public opinion, or laudable zeal for public good, the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, and infatuation. So here he's saying not only could you be hurting your general relationships, right, with foreign nations and ultimately undermining the good of your own nation, but there's an incentive that you introduce into the nation when you create favored nation status with another nation. You end up creating a relationship where certain elites, certain leaders inside your society can gain interest, they can gain power by appealing to the interests of the foreign nation because your leaders have allowed the interests of the foreign nation to be conflated with the interests of your own nation. And so even though they are out there pushing for a foreign nation, they can stand as if they are someone who is listening to the popular will, facilitating the public good, doing what the public ultimately wants, because they are doing what the public has been uh, trained to see as their advantage, right? They have seen this idea that this foreign nation has the same interests as just as important as their nation, and so they become very passionate about it. And then when a leader who wants to create favor with that nation goes and speaks to them, they can speak as if they are talking about the good of the United States because those two have been conflated. They've been wrapped up together. And so he warns that if you allow someone to achieve this favorable status, then you have leaders who will be basically incentivized to lobby on behalf of that nation and act as if it is the interests of your nation. As avenues to foreign influence in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, and to influence or awe the public councils? Such an attachment of a small or weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to be the sad light of the latter. So we have this scenario where he says, if you have these avenues of foreign influence, if you have these entry points for other nations to come in and act as if their interests are the same as your interests, then you create a scenario that should be alarming to the enlightened and independent patriot, right? It's something that you, as a patriot, should be worried about because you don't want to create the opportunities for foreign nations to tamper with your domestic factions. And again, if we look at what's going on right now, where we have this huge showdown on college campuses between two factions, Israel and Palestine, that have nothing to do with the United States, we can see so much of American political life fracturing across support for these two foreign nations, right? This is exactly what George Washington says don't do. He says, be careful. Be careful, because if you create these opportunities for foreign influence, they will come in and tamper with domestic factions. They will look for people inside the United States who support one side or another, and they will work together, or well, they won't work together, they'll work against each other, but they'll work with those factions to agitate, right? They will pull the American people apart. And that is a problem. That is a huge problem. This is something that is incredibly important right now because we see this on a regular basis. Every country that goes to war, Ukraine, they come in and they have to lobby us on a regular basis. Hey, I need to show up to all of your different institutions and demand all of these different benefits for my country, and we're gonna draw the line between liberal and conservatives as whether or not you think that you should send infinite dollars to Zelensky in Ukraine, right? Like, and he knows it. He knows that the most important thing he can do is not really fighting the war in Ukraine. The most important thing he can do is lobby the United States and create factions in the United States, which is why he's basically working with the Democratic Party. That's why he's all but campaigning for Joe Biden, because he knows that as the head of Ukraine, the most important thing he can do is agitate factions at home. So no matter what the conflict is, Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, whatever, it's always clear that there is a concerted interest and effort to exacerbate domestic factions inside the United States along the lines of support for one of these countries or the other. And the reason, as George Washington, our first president, lays out here, is that you do not want to create this favored nation status or overt animus towards a nation, because either way it makes you the slave of these nations, right? I mean, he even gets to the point here where he says such an attachment of a small or weak towards a great power will dooms the former to be a satellite of the latter, right? It's very clear. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens. The jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake. Wait, awake? Like, woke? Was George Washington the first member of the woke right? Will we be seeing a diatribe about the dangers of George Washington and his identitarian politics? I don't know. Be careful. Watch out, guys. Founding fathers, woke right confirmed. I guess we need to cancel them, drive them from all of the institutions. I would say, I guess you got to tear down their statues, but you already did that, I suppose. So again, against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens. The jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. I'm going to read that one again, just in case you missed it. Since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. You want to talk to me about America being a republic? Great. No foreign influence. Straight from the mouth of George Washington, right there. Foreign influence is one of the most dangerous things to the Republican form of government. Governments cannot survive foreign influence. Again, from George Washington, a alleged member of the woke right. But that jealousy, to be useful, must be impartial, else it becomes the instrument of the very influence to be avoided, instead of a defense against it. Excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another cause those whom they actuate to see danger only on one side and serve to veil and even second the art of influence of the other. So again, he warns you that it's both excessive favoritism and excessive hate that are the problem. These are both issues. They're both issues, and they blind you and they feed on each other. You need to be careful. Don't be too impartial, but don't be too hostile either. Real patriots who may resist the intrigues of the favorite are liable to become suspected and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. Again, amazing amazing prescience here, right? George Washington saw all of this. He saw all of these problems coming, right? Real patriots who may resist the intrigues of the favorite are liable to become suspected and odious, while uh, its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. So he's saying the danger here is not only that these interests will enter into your country, but the people who warn against it, the people who are real patriots, they will become demonized for pointing out that foreign influence has entered into the country, while the people who have been duped and become tools of that foreign interest have usurped the applause and the confidence of the people. The people will end up cheering for the dupes and for the tools, and they will reject the real patriots. There was just an Atlantic article about the dangers of Pat Buchanan, how dangerous Pat Buchanan was. And guess what term they used? You'll never guess. You'll never guess what term, what political weapon that was meant to destroy the right they picked up. That's right. They picked up woke right. They called Pat Buchanan the woke right, which is exactly what James Lindsay wanted. He wanted that term to become a term that the left could use to destroy the right. And they say he's very dangerous because he was pushing these ideas like isolationism. So Pat Buchanan, very dangerous guy, right? He's been called a bigot his whole life because he wants America to care about Americans first, because he worries about foreign influence. He warns about foreign influence, and he wants people to focus on the people of the United States first. Don't have a hostility to another nation that is unwarranted. Don't have a friendship with a nation that is unwarranted. Do not be favorable or loyal to one. Don't despise and become over enraged the other. Focus on America. And George Washington says guys like Pat Buchanan will be hated for this. He will be hated for this if he does this. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. George Washington, again, knowing exactly what was going to happen. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is, in extending our commercial relations, to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here, let us stop. Right? So this is the idea. We can have commercial relations, we can trade with people, but that should be the end of our political connection with them as much as possible. So far as we have already formed those engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here, let us stop. All right, so we made some promises, we fulfilled those promises, and then we walk away. Okay, we're going to keep our promise there, and then we're walking away. We are not entangling ourselves on a regular basis. We are not continuing a super involved relationship. We made a promise, we keep it, we keep our word, and then we move on. We fulfill that commitment in good faith, but we keep our political connections to as little as possible. Just because we're trading with you doesn't mean we go to war with you. Just because we're exchanging intelligence one time doesn't mean we now have to fight your wars for you. Just because we're allies in one situation doesn't mean that now we are blood brothers to the end. We had a moment where we had a common cause, we fulfilled that cause, and then we move on. We do not continue to stay in that forever. Europe has a set of primary interests, which to us have none or very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the cause of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties in the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics or the ordinary combinations and collusions of her friendships or enmities. Understand this, right? This is a man who just broke away from the United Kingdom a few years ago. It has not been that long since the United States has severed its political ties to the United Kingdom. And obviously, the majority of Americans at this time still feel a reasonable connection to Europe. They are European descendants almost entirely. The vast majority of the population is European at this point, specifically Anglo, still for the most part. This is a very European-centric society in many ways. However, even at this time, and even with those close ties being relatively close in both heritage and culture and in time, still Washington says, don't be loyal to Europe. Do not treat Europe as if they are your brothers. Europe is involved in controversies all the time. Europe is constantly in these frequent controversies, and that means they are constantly involving themselves in political intrigue and war. Do not do this. So think about that. Just a few decades removed from being tied to the UK, not that just 100 or 2 years from basically everyone being in Europe at that point, all the people who are now making up the United States. He still says, do not tie yourself to European affairs. So if that was true back then, how much more true is it today? And how much more true is it to societies that are not European in nature? We have no loyalty to them. They are not our civilization, not even Europe. George Washington says we are a distinct nation, a distinct people at this point. We do have a European heritage. We do have some cultural ties, but we are distinct people at this point. So we should not have we should not be overly interested in them. We should not have loyalty to them. They should not receive favored nation status. And again, if that is true of Europe, just a few decades after parting company from the UK, how much more true is it of far-flung countries that have nothing to do with Europe today? Our detachment and distance situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course. So one of the beauties of the United States, one of the gifts of America has always been how far it is away from pretty much every other country that could challenge us, right? Mexico is not really going to put up a challenge. Canada's not really going to put up a challenge. We are very far away from any nation that realistically could put us in a bad situation. We don't have to constantly be involved. We're not like, Europe is always in this scenario where like you have to care deeply about Germany and France and England and Spain and like who's in alliance with who and are they going to team up and is Russia working with these guys? Because if at any point the balance of power is out, then just the whole thing can collapse. All of Europe can become very destabilized very quickly. In the United States, that's just not the case. And so we don't have to involve ourselves constantly. We don't have to pursue the European understanding of like this constant involvement with other nations because we are so isolated geographically. And that's a blessing. We should embrace that gift. If we remain one people under an efficient government, the period is not far off when we may defy martial injury from external annoyance, when we may take such an attitude as will cause the neutrality we may at any time resolve upon to be scrupulously respected, when belligerent nations, under the impossibility of making acquisition upon us, will not lightly hazard the giving us of provocation, when we may choose peace or war as our interest, guided by justice shall counsel. So we're going to become a great nation. And we're going to become a great nation to the point where we will get to decide whether or not we involve ourselves in war. We can choose. We don't have to be goaded into constant conflict by foreign powers or by things that are outside of our control. We don't have to constantly enter into conflict because it's so hard for other nations to do damage to us because of our geographical location and now our position of military might that we just don't need to constantly involve ourselves anymore. We can choose. We have the power. Why forego the advantages of so peculiar a situation? Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and our prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? Why throw away our position? Why throw away our position as a mighty country, isolated and able to make its own decisions? Why throw away that ability to be our own and choose our own power and our own interests and the interests of our own people? And why stand upon the power of foreign nations? Why stand on foreign ground? Why interweave our destinies with any part of Europe or the rest of the world? It just doesn't make any sense. There's no reason to entangle our peace and our prosperity with the toils of these other people. It's saying it very clearly. There is no need to give up this blessing. God has given you a blessing that you as a nation can stand apart, that you as a nation can stand tall and you can make your own decisions in your own interests. And not only that, you can set an example for other nations. They can look at you and say, That is how one conducts themselves. That is how a nation is strong, fighting for its own people and for its own interests, for pushing that that be the only priority, for expelling foreign interest, and for not tying itself to others and constantly involving itself in the intrigue and the interests of other peoples. He makes it very clear here. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliance with any portion of the foreign world. One more time from the top for everybody in the back. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliance with any portion of the foreign world. I'm looking at you, NATO. So far, I mean, as we are now at liberty to do it, for let me not be understood as capable of patronizing infidelity to existing engagements. So he says, look, we're going to fulfill existing engagements, but then it's time to move on. Right? We're not going to break our word, but we fulfill our word and then we move on. We do not stay there permanently. Right? We're not going to betray people we have allied ourselves with in the moment we have allied them. But that is not a permanent blank check as an ally. You don't just get to be on board the America train or make demands of America in perpetuity. And we should not be making more of those if we can. If to the degree in which we can avoid these alliances, we should. I hold the maximum no less applicable to public than to private affairs, that honesty is always the best policy. So again, if I made a promise to you, I'm keeping that promise, but then we move forward, right? I'm not making new promises. I'm not tying myself more. I'm going to complete the contract as offered, but then I'm moving on. I repeat it, therefore, let those engagements be observed in their genuine sense. But in my opinion, it is unnecessary and would be unwise to extend them. So again, he recognizes that we have treaties. He recognizes that we've made commitments. He says, all right, we will fulfill those commitments because we want our reputation to be one of honesty. We want our reputation to be one of faithfulness. But once we are done with them, we should not make any more of them and we should not extend them. These are not infinite guarantees of American intervention or American allyship. You do not get a blank check because at one point you were an ally. You do not get permanent membership. You do not get permanent protection. You don't get permanent intelligence sharing. You don't get permanent influence in the country because you were an ally at one point. We fulfill our obligation to you as we promised, and then we move forward. It's unwise to extend it, and it's unnecessary to extend it, in George Washington's own words. Taking care always to keep ourselves by suitable establishment on a respectable defensive posture, we may safely trust to temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. So George Washington isn't saying be an isolationist. That's not what he's saying. He says, obviously, we do have interests overseas. Obviously, we are going to have to, at some point, have alliances. However, if we keep a suitable establishment of a respectable defensive posture, then we can safely entrust to temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. So we're not just joining alliances to join them. We're not just signing military treaties or involving ourselves in wars to involve ourselves in wars. When we have an extraordinary emergency, hint, we do not have extraordinary emergencies right now. So just the implications there should be pretty obvious. If we do not have an extraordinary emergency, we don't need a temporary alliance. And if we do have a temporary alliance, the key word there is temporary. Again, we are going to be keepers of our word. If we made the alliance, we will keep the alliance. But the alliance is temporary. It does not give you political purchase in the United States. It does not give you infinite amount of credit in the United States. We have an emergency, we make a temporary alliance, and then we go back to a respectable defensive posture. The default position of the United States is America alone and America first. If we need to make alliances in an emergency situation, we do so. They become temporary, and we do not extend them unnecessarily. We do not make new ones unnecessarily. As he pointed out earlier, to the extent that we need to have relationships with other countries, they should be commercial in nature and as little political involvement as possible. Again, pretty straightforward. And I got to say, this is my foreign policy. If you want to know What is Auron's foreign policy? This is it. This is exactly where we should be. And I think as conservatives, as people who talk about tradition, as people who talk about carrying what the founders said and what they believed, I think that should be your position too. I think this is the traditional conservative opinion for the United States. The same one that Pat Buchanan had, the same one that I have, the same one that many Trump supporters have. America first. It doesn't mean isolationism. It doesn't mean we never pay attention to what's going on in foreign policy, but we only make temporary alliances when absolutely necessary in extraordinary emergencies. And otherwise, we don't involve ourselves in the problems of other nations. Because again, as George Washington pointed out, the more you involve yourself with other foreign nations, the more you invite foreign influence into the country, and more the foreign influence will start to fracture your people and will destroy your republic. And if that doesn't remind you of what is going on right now, then I don't know what to say. We are literally watching the country getting torn apart by foreign factions. Americans thinking that they are righteous on one side or the other by declaring their allegiance to a foreign power. That's not what it should be. If you've got a foreign flag in the bio on Twitter, you're doing it wrong. If you're spending all your time yelling about your hatred for a foreign nation, you're doing it wrong. You should not be spending all of your time being concerned with a foreign nation, either pro or against. You should only think about it to the extent to which you must in order to care about the well-being of the United States. And if you're doing it right, that should be barely at all. Because of the geographic blessing the United States has been given, we do not have to worry about other nations all the time. We don't have to live like this. We can actually care about our nation and our people. And that's not just okay, it's the literal policy that George Washington laid out in his farewell address. So I say, for once, let's do what the founders actually said, what they actually believed, what the first president of the United States actually said about foreign policy. Maybe that makes me a radical, but if it does, that means George Washington was a radical too. All right, guys, let's check here. I think we've got a question or two from the audience. Philosophical Thirstworm says, they too have been deaf to the voices of justice and consanguinity. Declaration of Independence equals woke right. Yeah, again, so many woke right quotes in founding documents, I guess. There's a lot of grievances, right? They aired all the grievances in the Declaration. So that one's probably, they talked about the injustice of the system and the need to dismantle it. So there's all that Marxism in the, again, if you take this analysis and you put it on the actual founding of the United States, you can create all this idea that the founding fathers were woke right. It's just insane. Philosophical Thirstworm says, I don't want to get involved at the most. I feel kinship for the Palestinians because as Americans, I know what it's like to be under Israeli occupation. Look, again, the whole point is to not be obsessed one way or another, right? To not find solidarity with any one people, whether it be Israel or Palestine. Neither of these people are on your side. America is on its own side. We are our own team, and no one on a foreign nation is on it. We are our own team. America first. So don't feel kinship with the Israelis. Don't feel kinship with the Palestinians. Don't feel overly hostile to one or overly hostile to another. Don't be a slave either way. This is Washington's whole point. Don't be a slave to your passions. Do what is best for the country. Focus on that. If that means you need to take steps one way or another, then that's what you do. But the focus, the passion should be about your people, should be about this nation. And to the extent you're taking action, and action might be necessary, but to the extent you're taking action in foreign policy, it should always be America first. It should always be centered on America. Never a special relationship of favorability with one nation, and never excessive hostility that's going to drive you to make mistakes. Choose America every time. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. I want to thank everybody for watching today. If you have not subscribed on YouTube, you need to make sure you do that. Click the bell and notifications so you know when we go live. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. When you do, if you leave a rating or review, it helps with the algorithm. And of course, if you would like to support this show, you can head over to shopblazemedia.com and pick up some merch from the merch store. I'm wearing the Total State shirt today. So if you would like to get some Total State merch or some other Auron MacIntyre merch, head over to shopblazemedia.com. Click on the Auron MacIntyre collection. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.